And welcome to an Integrated Interventions podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Dundas. I'm the Director of Education. Joining me to my left is Terry Edelmann. He is the owner of Integrated Interventions. And across the way from me is Chris Garrett, Executive Director. Thanks for joining me today, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So I have a series of questions. These will often come up in conversations that you have with parents. And I figured this is a great way for us to address those questions. There is always a lot of questions to be had. So it's always great to hear it directly from you two. So let's go ahead and get started with our first question is, my student will never respond to consequences. They will only power struggle if punished, and then they will stop functioning completely. You have to give them what they want, or they'll refuse to do everything.
Yeah, that's true.
That is true.
So I guess we'll start with you, Terry, and then work our way over to Chris.
No, go to Chris. I just wanted to help you guys. Now we're done, right?
That's our only question. I'll see you later.
I thought it was true or false. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Wrong format. Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
No, so most of those statements are false because people respond to what they respond to. Oftentimes we have parents that'll send their students here and say, I know my student the best. They will respond to X, Y, and Z, or they won't respond to X, Y, and Z. We find that a lot of times you just change the environment, change the people that they're interacting with, build a relationship, and students tend to respond better. Parents have a lot of experience with their students, but it doesn't always translate over to what we're doing with the students and the relationships that they're building here. And we rely on natural consequences. So oftentimes if a student is displaying a behavior that is so extreme that it's going to cause some type of interaction with police, or they're going to not be able to eat the foods that they want that week, that they end up eating, basic food for the week because they didn't earn enough money to pay for extra food or the really good Cheerios or whatever they're looking for. The students do respond to the natural consequences. We're not a program that makes up consequences. So usually if a student is facing consequences, they definitely earned it. And those consequences do impact behavior. Sometimes it increases negative behavior. Sometimes it decreases the negative behavior, depending on what the consequence is. So,
and I think if I was going to dovetail in on that, it would be that, when I talk to parents, I tell them we don't really have consequences here. The consequences here are to make a negative behavior more uncomfortable than a positive behavior. And a lot of times we can do that with our presence alone. Everybody has a family member somewhere, a grandparent or a parent or an uncle, that all they had to do was look at you when you were doing something wrong and you would stop doing it. Right? And so our presence alone sometimes is enough to make a negative behavior uncomfortable. The other thing is that we have layers of people, right? So, parents, they have mom and dad. And maybe if they're lucky, they have maybe, some friends that are involved, or an aunt or an uncle, right? We've got sometimes 50 staff that we can dedicate to this behavior. So if a student doesn't want to do something, that's a negative adult behavior. I don't want to get up. I don't want to participate today. Well, it's okay. Don't. No one's going to drag you out of bed by your shirt. But we do have the ability to sit here and talk to you for the 8 hours that I'm scheduled to work. And when you become rude and obnoxious and you don't want my company anymore, it becomes bothersome to me, or I get tired, then I'll rotate out with another staff. And then we'll rotate with another staff. And we can do this for days and weeks, even months on end. It's always the water against the stone theory, and the water always wins. So we have lots of time to change behaviors. Parents don't have that. They have jobs, they have responsibilities, they have other children. They can't dedicate that kind of time to dealing with the behaviors of one person. And so we can.
And sometimes the stone is going to try to win.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. That pushback, it's too long of a resistance. When you're pushing back against something, these students just don't have the willpower to maintain that. They'll go laterally and try to create some other behavior. When you redirect them back to the original thing that we were dealing with, they just don't have the ability to do that. And I'm talking from 38 years of experience. They don't have the ability to outlast us. Any student ever. They just don't have it. Some students can last longer, but they just can't do it.
Leads us to our next question is, if a student has staff around them at all times, how are they still getting in trouble? That is a question that we often get.
Yeah, we don't compel students to do anything. So students in our program still have their autonomy. We're a young adult program. So we're not controlling students. We're building relationships. And that takes time. We all know that it takes time to build a relationship with a student. And we will see behaviors. Students can choose to get themselves into trouble. They can choose not to. One of our big pillars that we focus on when they first come in the program is work ethic, right? And we like them to establish and demonstrate that they have work ethic before we send them out into the community. And we'll have students that'll push back and say, no, I'm going to go get a job on day 2. Well, that doesn't mean that we stand in front of them and hold them down and say, no, you're not going to fill out a job application. That student can very well walk to the nearest convenience store, fill out an application, and get a job that day. We're not going to drive them there. We're not going to help them fill out the application. But if they're being defiant, they can do that. And then if they get the job and lose it on that first day, then we can talk about what happened and continue to build a relationship and talk to them about the importance of learning work ethic prior to jumping into a job in the community. So that's a good example. Students can do lots of things, but we rely on building relationships to help steer or guide behavior to the more positive things, the more helpful things.
Yeah, along those same lines, I'm a little more challenging toward parents. When parents ask me, how is it that this student is getting in trouble? When they have people around to support them. Well, that's how they got sent here to begin with, probably, is that they were having trouble at home where they had parents to help them. They were having trouble at school where there's multiple educators to help them. They've had trouble in other programs where there's layers of people to support them. And that's why they're in treatment. For us, the elevated level of treatment is tolerance. We're not going to kick you out for those behaviors. We're going to continue to work with you on those behaviors and help you identify what the triggers are and what the coping skills are and how to get around that. So a level of tolerance is superior than no tolerance whatsoever. Right? You break something, you get kicked out. You run away, you get kicked out. If you're always getting kicked out for the behaviors that you have, how are you ever going to learn to deal with them? So then when we have those behaviors repeatedly, then parents are frustrated sometimes that we haven't been able to stop the behavior. Well, we have to be able to tolerate the behavior to be able to stop the behavior. And that takes time. And again, the consequence is that the behavior, that negative behavior, be more uncomfortable than a positive behavior. So, a student that is refusing to participate, then a layer of people that are sitting there talking to the student and making it comfortable for them to not participate, eventually they'll get up and do something. Other places don't have the ability to layer up the staffing that way.
Yeah, we're not about to avoid working with a student. That's why they've been removed from other programs or the home or the school. Whoever was dealing with that student or working with that student got tired of it and wanted to avoid it. They didn't want to do it anymore. And we operate on the opposite principle. We're going to continue to engage and maybe engage further or in ways that other people haven't even attempted to engage yet to show that we're going to stick around. And that can be very uncomfortable for a student as well. They'll change their behavior based on that piece. The fact that we're willing to continue to engage over and over again.
How does creativity play into that?
Oh, out of the box thinking?
Yes.
Yeah, it's substantial. So we do have the ability to do some things that other places can't do. And it's not that those other places or that being at home with those parents, whatever that look like, it doesn't mean that those people aren't, qualified to work with a student. That's not what that means at all. But you do have students that shouldn't be in a milieu. They don't do well in a milieu. And so then being able to custom fit their treatment plan so that it doesn't include a milieu setting where there's 10 other students. Or maybe that their work ethic has to be done. Like we had a student whose entire program was at night. They couldn't be out in the sunlight. So you had to get really creative to be able to put together a program that includes times for therapy and outings, times for interaction, cooking, shopping, and in the clinical aspects in a time of day where most people would be off work. So creativity is a huge part of getting buy-in.
How do you get students to come to program, or how do you get them to buy in when they maybe are kind of dragging their feet and wanting to come to integrated interventions?
Well, that's usually that usually starts with a conversation with Terry, and I'll let him talk about what that looks like. But every student before they come into program, will have a conversation with an owner of the program prior to coming in to talk about what we offer and how that looks for that student. But I'll let Terry kind of take that.
Yeah, it's kind of a multi-layered question. Of course, we're multi-level thinkers, so that's okay. Generally what happens is when I hear a parent ask, what do I do if my student won't come to program? It really means, they're somewhere currently, and they need to come to integrated. What happens when they tell me no? And so the question across the board is the bottom line is the parents are really the ones that have to be able to toe a line. The parents are the ones that have to be able to tell their student, if you don't do what we're requesting that you do, there will be no other services for you. So whatever that looks like, if that means you're not paying their phone bill and their car payment anymore, if that means that you're not paying for an apartment, you're not going to take their threat of running away and living on the street when they don't really have any skills to do that, you don't take that seriously. And of course, the big gun is if you don't give me what I want, I'm going to hurt myself or kill myself. And so you have to look at the treatment history and you have to take into account what's the seriousness of those threats and what's the history look like. And so the answer is, for most parents, they have to toe a line and tell their student what the expectation is, or they're not going to receive any more support from the parent. That's the extreme. The other ones are easier, right? The student is at a program, they're sorry that they did what they did at the program, or they're at home and they're promising and begging, I'll never behave that way again. I won't sneak out of my window. I'm not going to smoke pot anymore. I won't see that bully anymore. I won't steal your car, whatever the promises are. But you have to look at the history. That hasn't worked. And students one of the big ones that they pull out in those manipulations is, I can do this on my own. Why would you pay a program to help me do these things? I can do it on my own. Well, the answer to that is, you may be able to do that on your own, but you've never been able to demonstrate that, right? I'm sure you could get a job. You're 23 years old, but you've never been able to demonstrate employment for more than a day. So we don't have any reason to believe that you would be able to get a job. You won't stop doing drugs, even though you've told us repeatedly that you would. You're not participating in an adult level in anything. This program will help you participate in society at an adult level. And so then the students are like, fine, if that gets me out from underneath the parents' control. And a lot of times that's the reason they come here, is because when we're talking to them, we're explaining that if you're tired of being controlled and your behaviors are begging people to control you, then we will help you change your behaviors and demonstrate a level of control that feels to people like you can manage yourself, and then you can get out from underneath the control thumb. Of course, if you don't like people controlling your phone, well, then if you had a job and paid your own bill, people probably couldn't tell you what to do with your phone. So it's one of those catch-22s also. The student doesn't want anybody to tell them what to do. They also want the parents to pay for everything because they're overindulged, and they're expert manipulators. And they will raise the bar higher than their parent can jump, so it makes it uncomfortable for the parent, which in our program is quite the opposite. You can't raise the bar high enough to make us uncomfortable. And we have the ability to make your negative behavior more uncomfortable than a positive one for very long periods of time. So that's how we get the change in behavior. And that's kind of the course of events that you see to get kids here.
Yeah. What other insights do you have to offer in relation to this topic, Chris?
I just like that we require the students to have a conversation with an owner before coming in. And rarely do we have students come into program that didn't agree to come to program. Yeah. In fact, I can't think of one that was like, no, I'm not going, and somehow ended up here, because if they want to sit in their bed or not come, they have that choice. So I like that they have to demonstrate some level of buy-in the first day walking through the door. And now that could change after an hour. And it has, but I like that that's still a premise that we operate under. because it's always great to say, you chose to be here. You can walk down the street today and leave if you want, if you have the skills to do that. And if they did have the skills to do that, they probably don't need to be here. So.
Yeah, some of the interesting things that come up, and it might be stuff that you would ask anyway, parents surely bring it up, and along these same lines is the student has communication with myself mostly to say, I want to come to this program. And then when they get here, we have a communication hold in place specifically so that they'll build a relationship with the people who are here to help them. But if they get a hold of a way to communicate with the parents, the first thing they'll do is start to torture the parents with, they start to torture the parents with statements that aren't true. They don't feed me. They're isolated. I don't have any staff. I don't have any. Nobody spends any time with me. And all it is a manipulation to try to get the parents to do something. When the parents were informed prior to the student coming, these are the things that you're going to see from the student. The other thing the student is informed is that you're going to work. We're going to have you do some chores. You're going to earn some money, and you're going to be actively involved in budgeting money and purchasing your own groceries and cooking your own food. And the students will be like, I don't understand why I have to do any of this. My parents pay you this amount of money, and I don't understand why I have to cook my own food. You guys should hire a chef, right? Why do I have to do my own laundry? My other program had laundry services, right? Well, we're a young adult program, and the focus in this program is to teach students how to take care of themselves so that when they leave our program, they don't need another program ever again. And so that's the conversation that I have with the student before they get here. And they've stated that they're up for that before they come.
But the reality of when they get here and that idea of fear of the unknown, I guess, is what happens after I've done this? Because you work with so many students that find comfort in treatment. And then what happens when they're realizing that, oh, wow, there's a whole other world outside of it. I'm not going to have the protection that exists within the walls of integrated. How do you work with the student to help them overcome those fears?
Yeah, we'll have Chris answer that question a little bit. I think from my perspective, what you're saying is, and we see this quite often, that students become addicted to treatment, and parents do as well. We have students that as they start to perform, they get better, they're functioning at a higher level. Parents will start to pick that apart. Like it's part of their identity that they have a sick kid, right? And so then what happens is as they start to lose their identity, they don't know what to do. So a lot of times the parents create the drama, the parents create the problem, they start picking apart the treatment, even looking for reasons to not let the kid progress. Like, yeah, they've learned how to drive, they're doing a good job, but I don't think they should ever drive. I don't think they'll ever be well enough. And you're like, but what's the proof in the pudding? Where are they showing you that they can't drive? And it really comes down to the parents have identified with a kid that'll never drive, and they're not really they don't know what to do once you move past that. For our students, it's the same thing. Our students will become addicted to treatment. Well, treatment perpetuates treatment. Okay, so the idea isn't for the student, I'm going to get better and then I won't need any more treatment programs. What happens with the student is, I'm going to do what this treatment program needs me to do, and then they're going to send me to another treatment program. And then I'm going to do what that treatment program needs me to do. And once I've done all that, I get to go to another treatment program. And you see that a lot of our students have a history that are anywhere from kind of an average of 5 to 7 programs, all the way out to 24 placements and 11 years of treatment. And all they've really done is mastered the ability to move through programs. They still don't know how to balance a checkbook. They don't know how to drive. They don't know how to date. They don't know how to participate in the community. But along those same lines, functioning as a young adult in the community is quite unnerving for them, and it gives them reason to then behave in a manner that will get them placed in another treatment program.
Self-sabotage is
self-sabotage.
Yeah, to a certain extent. On the flip side of that is all of our students are involved in their own treatment plan. So when we have a student come into program, they're working with their coordinator, they're working with leadership to map out their own goals of what they want life to look like once they leave integrated. I can't tell you how many students have come into my office and asked, how do I graduate integrated? What do I need to do? I'm like, I don't know. There isn't a graduation. When you can take care of yourself and move out on your own, then I guess you've graduated, but what needs to be in place for you to do that? So it's small wins along the way. It's learning how to be an adult. It's learning how to be in the community. And for some students, that takes a very long time. And other students master those things much quicker, depending on what their life looked like before coming here. I find that students that have a long history of treatment struggle that much more with integrating into a community and living a more typical young adult life. Students that don't have a long history of treatment, that come in because something happened and there's something specific that they're working on, tend to move through things a little bit quicker because they've had more exposure to what life outside of treatment looks like. So keeping in mind, somebody that's had a long history of treatment really struggles to turn that around because they don't know what life looks like. But it's the small wins. It's helping them map out a life outside of treatment that anybody else would enjoy. And then we can take that apart piece by piece and look at the areas they need to work on in their life to get there.
My child got in a fight with one of their peers. I want them to switch houses immediately. And I mean right now.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a question.
It's a mixture of question and statement.
It sounds like a demand. That's what I heard.
And sometimes it can come across that way.
Yes, my thing about that is I don't mean to be lackadaisical. However, we have to understand what a fight means. So we don't have students here that are thugs. We don't have street kids that came out of gangs. We don't have UFC fighters. They're not trained boxers and wrestlers. And so really, when you see a fight here, it looks like siblings shoving and pushing. I witnessed a student that hit another student with the pinky side of their hand, like this swat. Rarely, if ever, has there been any damage. And so I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not giving permission for students to squabble, but clearly that's what young adults do at times, is they squabble. So if you're trying to have your student live a life where they're never going to have any kind of physical altercation with anybody, I'm not really sure where you would place them or how you would accomplish that. But I guess it's possible. However, in treatment, they are going to argue, they are going to squabble, and at times that may get physical. Generally, we have somebody close by to be able to mediate that and to interfere and to stop any seriousness whatsoever from happening. However, the goal of the program is also to teach people how to live together. And that includes how to get through a squabble with your housemate. Now, let's say we were talking about students that weren't in treatment, and we're just talking about some regular old college students that live together. They steal each other's food. They steal each other's clothes. They might steal each other's girlfriend or boyfriend. These things are normal. These things happen, and they're going to fight about it. Whether that turns into a punch in the face or whether that turns into, I'm going to steal your food to get even, all those are very common behaviors. It's not uncommon in the quote-unquote real world, so why would it be different in treatment? So, our answer is that we need to look at what level of intervention do we need? What's the mediation look like? Can we sit down and have a conversation and get students to learn how to get along? Can they agree to separate? But no, it's got to be treatment related. It can't be just a response to parents who want to protect their kids. It's important that parents want to protect their kids. I have kids and I'd like to protect them. But if they get in a fight at school, I'm not going to require the school to kick everybody out of the school so that my student can have their own thing. That's just not realistic. That's not what's going to happen. The other thing is that you're teaching your student that the parents are going to jump in and save them. So what are you going to do if they get in an argument at McDonald's where they're working, or they're working at the local mall, or they're driving in a car and somebody cuts them off and then they're yelling, screaming, and in an argument? Like, are you going to jump in and save them every single time, or are you going to go ahead and let them learn how to work these issues out? Far more important that you go ahead and let them have a normal young adult experience and stop trying to save them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we've had this happen, a number of times in the program where there's a squabble like Terry's talking about. And it's generally in the student's best interest to stay there and work it out with the housemate. They're going to learn far more from that than they are moving to a house all by themselves and then being isolated, or us picking out the perfect person that'll never push their buttons. Like, that doesn't exist. So, if a student needs a change of scenery or household, I'd much rather that student come to me and talk to me about what they did to try to mitigate the conflict in the house and what they see for themselves moving forward and how it would benefit them to be with a different roommate situation than have parents tell me to move that student today. We're a young adult program. We want the student to act like a young adult. And if they need a change of scenery, I'd rather they come to me and talk to me about it. And hopefully not having been coached by mom and dad before coming in the room. I'd rather they go into therapy and talk to their therapist and come up with a plan with their therapist and then address me that way. So there's lots of ways to make things happen. I feel like those are great learning experiences. We can turn them into learning experiences, and the student can grow by having conflict. We don't grow without conflict. It's impossible. You're going to stay stagnant.
So how do you navigate, say, a police interaction if, because in real life with consequences, someone gets in a fight, the other person can call the police on there if there's assault and battery, and police do become involved. How, as a program, how does integrated interventions navigate that?
Usually it's a distraction. I have Terry run down the road screaming to distract the police. Exactly.
Oh, wait, the kids follow me or the cops follow me?
Oh, the cops follow
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Either could follow you.
All. Yeah. So a couple things that come along with police interaction. First of all, the police know who we are. We're a treatment program, and the police are fully aware of the individuals, not the names and their diagnosis, but they're aware we're a treatment program and that we take students that have behaviors and also have processing speed issues and diagnosis that could be cause them to not deal with some challenges the same way other people would deal with them. So they come to us as a police officer shows up. They're already ready to work through whatever the issue is. They're not showing up like a hammer to a nail. They're showing up like a therapist and a counselor. How can I help these people navigate this? How can I help somebody work through whatever the issues are? So that's the first thing to understand. The second thing to understand is that most of the time the police officer will then speak with the student or students, talk about what those things are, and explain what the consequences could be if the behavior was to continue, and then the police officer will leave. And so the students have had a meaningful interaction with a law enforcement agent who's been able to explain to them the consequences of their behavior. And they, again, haven't had to feel the consequences of the behavior, but they've got it from an authority, right? It's not their staff and it's not their parent, and that's an appropriate learning event. So the other side to that is students need to feel natural consequences. So our students generally are protected from everything. You break the windows out of a house and the parents pay for it, and there is no charges because they're in a program. They steal a car, they wreck the car, and the only thing the parents have to do is fix the car. But the student doesn't get any consequences like anybody else in the world would, right? They don't get charged with anything. So then you start to recognize a pattern with those students. Every time they have a problem, they break stuff, and the parents pay for it. And they break stuff again, and the parents pay for it. You don't change the behavior because they don't feel any consequences. Nothing happens to them. Same thing with drug charges. Whatever that stuff might be, you can continually see that pattern. So it's okay to have natural consequences come into play. And a lot of times, especially in anything that's domestic now, and I don't mean necessarily domestic violence, but let's say a kid takes a rock or a key and scratches a neighbor's car. Well, the neighbor, the police department, the district attorney, anybody that witnessed that can press charges. It doesn't have to be the car owner that presses charges. And the reason that they've done that is because people continually protect people that commit crimes or that do negative things, right? So you break windows. We could have a police officer show up and decide that he's going to press charges for disturbing the peace and property destruction, even though it's my house, right? And I could say, well, I don't really want to press charges. And the police officer can say, that's because you care about the kid, you don't want them to get in trouble, or you're afraid they'll do it again, or they're going to hurt themselves. And we're not afraid of those things. This person needs consequences, and they've obviously been protected from that. So it is multiple layer. We would like to be able to work through the issue and have it be a meaningful learning experience. And then sometimes that has happened so many times that the student recognizes they don't get consequences for anything. So they're just going to keep up the behavior until they do feel consequences. And then at that time, if they get the natural consequences of law enforcement, pressing charges, a fine, going to jail, whatever that looks like, that's out of everybody's hands except for law enforcement. And at that point, then as a program, and I'll have Chris talk more about this, but as a program, we work in conjunction with law enforcement, an attorney, to help navigate the court system with like deferred adjudication. So they have to answer to the court, but it might not end up on their record. And it gives us another layer of control with a student who's having a difficult time that other parents or programs wouldn't have that added layer of support.
Yeah, once law enforcement and the court get involved, a lot of things are out of our hands, right? So we switch gears. Now it's supporting the student with navigating the court system. And there's quite a few of us here at Integrated that have helped multiple students navigate the court system. And you never know what the consequence of that's going to be. Some students may be on probation for 2 years. Another student might be on a very light probation for 1 year and have to jump through a couple of hoops. So we switch gears, we support them, help them get through that process. Always encourage the family to utilize the public defender so that the student really knows what it's like to go through that and not have the high-powered attorney behind them to get them out of trouble. We want them to have the consequences, but we're also really good at communicating with the prosecuting attorney. He knows who we are. He knows about our program, as well as the public defender's office. So we can work with them when they're coming up with plea arrangements and that sort of thing. Get our students back into program and moving forward again. And I've seen a lot of really good things come from that process. I've had multiple students turn things around based on that process. And if that process would not have happened, they would have continued the negative behavior. So sometimes it has to go there. We try not to go there, but when it does, it can be really helpful. It can be another good tool to help turn people around.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'd like to add about it is that, for people that are listening to this, it doesn't apply to 80% of our families. And usually the families that it does apply to, they're already having the experience or have had the experience, and that's why they're asking the question. Most of our students are not ever involved with law enforcement at all. We just want people to understand that if you're asking the question, you probably have a reason to ask the question, so we want to give a clear answer. And for people that are listening that don't have any concerns about law enforcement, they've never had those interactions, that's fine. It doesn't apply to them at all.
So I have some questions that are centering around staff. First of which is, what are your qualifications for staff, and what kinds of training do we provide to staff?
What we look for in staff is we look for an associate's, a bachelor's degree, 3 years experience in a related field. And then we have ongoing training that is weekly. I'll have Chris talk a little bit more about the ongoing training. But I could tell you we do more training than anybody anywhere outside of a hospital. You could ask people across the board, and they recognize that. Our in-person training on site, on the job, is ongoing every day. So we'll talk to Chris a little bit more about what that looks like.
Yeah. So in terms of our staff and the types of people that we look for, we definitely want people from all walks of life. Our staff are commonly referred to as mentors, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for good mentors, people that have life experience as well as experience in the field or in a related field, like Terry said. But really what it boils down to is training our staff. So each week we have a 2-hour training that is conducted either by licensed professionals such as myself or Joshua, our clinical director, as well as you, Patrick, have taken on a lot of those trainings, from any kind of topic you can imagine related to mental health, but as well as education, and informing our mentors, about different diagnosis, you name it. We also like to pull in other professionals in the community to do trainings and services with our staff, to get them kind of a flavor of what the community is teaching and seeing. Recently, it was an autism training. We had a professional from the community come in and train specifically on autism. So the training, it's weekly, it's ongoing. We do everything in our power not to miss that. It's where our staff really get a flavor of what we're trying to do to help our students move forward and what the vision of our company is, in essence. So lots of training. Like Terry said, nobody else trains as much or as often as we do.
Yeah, I think along those same lines of training, in a description of what we do as a program, when I'm talking to parents, and it's generally parents that come up with this question, I'll describe, we're not a phase program and we're not a level program, but to describe what we do, we kind of describe it in phases, right? We start with work ethic, we move into community-based employment, we move into higher education, and then career development. Roughly. Obviously, it doesn't always work in that particular order, or at that, not everybody's at the same speed. Everybody's a custom fit program. So, but at the end of my description of what we do as a program, parents will ask, well, what's the clinical aspect? And so I think from my experience, what I see is that people think the clinical aspects are therapy specifically or therapeutic groups specifically. And then medication, of course, is managed by a psychiatrist. And what's happening across the board is that they're missing that the entire process is therapeutic. Being able to learn how to get out of bed and follow a schedule, and be able to attend events, whether that's therapy or whether that's an outing or whether that's going to work, and then being able to get feedback about those things and then understand how to cope with those things. Everything that we do at this program is therapeutic. So I want to make sure that everybody understands the people that are doing the most work with the student are the people that are working with the student day in and day out. And that's why we focus our training on the job training, in-person training, and those in-service trainings, so that the mentors are getting the majority of that. Our clinical professionals already have a big education and a lot of training. But we want to make sure that those people are passing it on to the people that are doing the direct care, the mentors, the side-by-side work. Because realistically, that's where the student is going to dump the most information. Most of that information that comes from a student that gets passed to a therapist doesn't come during the therapy session. It comes during a car ride from point A to point B, and the student dumps that information onto the mentor that they're working with and that they trust. And then the mentor then is encouraging them to talk to their therapist about that information, or during a team meeting, we're talking about that information as a group. That's where the majority of that work comes from. It doesn't come out of a once a week or twice a week therapy session.
Yeah, you can think of a good example is, like, how often do you see a crisis occur inside of your 45-minute to hour-long therapy session? It doesn't happen. When those crises occur, when those students are seeking support or needing to use coping skills, whatever that looks like, it's typically throughout the week. Maybe they get a call from home and they have bad news, or somebody told them no. That's when you're going to get that escalation. That's when you're going to have your, crisis or pseudo crisis, and having staff members that are trained to manage that in the moment, or who have talked to the therapist and have ideas in terms of what's the student working on with their coping skills, so that I can suggest those things and do that with the student. That's where they're actually applying the therapeutic knowledge, applying the training, and that's how the students are growing. It's not happening in that 1 hour with a therapist. They might be learning some good skills. They might be getting a lot off their chest. All these things are great, but the real work is being done in the field.
How do you respond to someone that says that a mentor isn't qualified because they don't have letters behind their name?
Well,
yeah, I don't agree with that. I've got some letters behind my name, and there's some people that I do great work with, and there's other people that I don't. we're not looking for somebody with a bunch of letters behind their name. We're looking for people that build relationships with the students, because that's who the student's going to trust. And when that person has been adequately trained by our staff, they can really make a difference in that student's life. That's where we're seeing the real work. So letters don't really mean anything at the end of the day.